And so you put a mattress in the back of the van?
Mm-hmm.
And what month was this?
This was 6 months into New York. In January was when I first started living in a van in New York.
3 years. That's how long it took for Hans Kim to go from sleeping in a van in New York City, grinding open mics for nobody, to standing on stage in front of hundreds of thousands of Kill Tony viewers as the show's most talked about regular.
Wow.
Thank you.
Hans Kim.
Thank you.
And it took less than 1 year for the whole thing to fall apart. What happened to Hans Kim isn't a simple story of talent running out or an audience moving on. It's about a man who fought his way into one of the most unforgiving rooms in comedy, earned his spot through genuine persistence, and then watched everything unravel through a combination of bad habits, poor decisions, and one challenge he never saw coming from a direction he never expected. This is how it happened. Hans Kim's first appearance on Kill Tony was in 2016, episode 177. He got 60 seconds on stage, delivered a clean set, and then largely disappeared from the show's radar. Nothing about that night suggested he was destined for anything more than a solid bucket pull, but
Tonight's show will start with the comedy stylings of Hans Kim. Hans Kim is next. First on Kill Tony.
the story of how Hans got to that stage starts 4 years earlier, and it's not a glamorous one. In his early 20s, he was fired from a burger shop. No backup plan, no obvious direction. His father, a successful real estate developer in Korea, had built a life around discipline and results. His son's inability to hold down a basic job was not something he viewed with patience. Hans has spoken about that period openly, the feeling of being a disappointment, of having nothing to show and no clear way forward. What shifted things was a podcast. He started listening to Joe Rogan. Something about the format, the long conversations, the candor, the idea that you could build something from scratch by just putting in the work, connected with him. He decided to try stand-up comedy. For the next 4 years, he performed in Seattle every night he could. His mother, who saw something in him that his father didn't, allowed him to live rent-free in the family's Seattle apartment. That removed one major obstacle. He didn't need to split his time between comedy and paying rent. He could just do the work. But Seattle had limits. The comedy scene wasn't growing. After 4 years of consistent gigging and one decent Kill Tony appearance, Hans decided to make a bigger move. He bought a van, loaded it with a mattress, and drove to New York City. For 3 years in New York, he lived out of that van. Food stamps, limited income, doing sets wherever he could get on stage. By the time he was approaching 30, the gap between where he was and where his father expected him to be had never felt wider.
All right, let's try Han Kim. Han Kim.
Hey guys.
I live in a van, so I'm unemployed, and I don't really do that. That's my old life.
The pressure was real, and then COVID shut everything down. With the New York scene on pause, Hans heard that something was happening in Austin. A comedy community was taking shape around Kill Tony. He made the drive south with what little money he had saved. It ended up being the decision that changed his life. When Hans Kim walked into Austin and put his name in the Kill, Tony Bucket, he had been doing stand-up for nearly 9 years. Most of those years had been invisible ones. No platform, no momentum, just sets in rooms where nobody was keeping count. His first Austin appearance produced another strong minute, but what really worked for him that night was the interview. He understood something about Kill Tony that a lot of visiting comics miss. The 60 seconds matter, but the conversation after is where personalities are made or broken. Hans leaned into being himself. Awkward, honest, a little chaotic. The crowd responded.
How long were you in New York?
3 years.
Okay, and that's when you started stand-up?
I started in Seattle for 5 and then moved to New York for my graduate program.
Oh,
comedy.
so Asian of you.
He got a spot at the secret show. A few weeks later, his name came out of the bucket again. Another good set, another strong interview. Then Tony Hinchcliffe's public incident with Pang Dong happened. The footage circulated. Tony's agency dropped him. Venues distanced themselves. The backlash was significant and fast-moving. Within days, Tony reached out to Hans. The conversation was direct. Hans was Asian, he was funny, and the timing created an opportunity. Hans acknowledged this later himself, saying his success was 10% hitting the mics, 10% his writing, and 80% being Asian at the right time. It's a line that's equal parts self-deprecating and accurate. He became Kill Tony's newest regular.
And then I did the minute, and then Tony was like, "You want to be our first replacement regular?" And I was like, "Yes."
What happened next surprised people who assumed Hans was simply a convenient hire. He started performing consistently, and the audiences responded to something the earlier regulars hadn't been bringing. His material was specific and deliberate. His stage presence was unusual. There was a self-awareness to it that generated real laughter, not just polite recognition.
I don't think everyone who's patriotic is a loser, but I do think everyone who's a loser is going to be a little bit patriotic.
The comment sections began noticing. Hans was standing out. He was killing it. People who had written him off as a novelty started paying closer attention. Tony's early hype around Hans created high expectations, but for a period, Hans justified them. He wasn't just surviving the platform, he was growing within it. Then the lifestyle of Austin started pulling at his focus. Hans has been open about what happened during this period. Austin offered a social world he hadn't previously had access to. Touring, opening for bigger names, more money than he'd ever seen, a social life that expanded rapidly, and cocaine, which started as a casual part of that scene and gradually became something harder to manage. Tony addressed it publicly on the show more than once.
Watched you go from broke and poor to thriving, and now the latest evolution of Hans Kim is that you're a drug-addicted diva.
Hans's comedy relied on tight writing. It wasn't the kind of act you could wing. Every minute was deliberate and constructed. When he stopped putting in the hours at the desk, it showed almost immediately in the performances. The sets got looser, less precise. The drop was gradual but visible to anyone watching closely. The comment sections, which had celebrated his rise, started turning. Around this time, a moment that seemed small at the time became a significant marker. Tony asked if any woman in the audience wanted to come on stage and kiss Hans. Someone volunteered. The crowd loved it. An arc was born, or perhaps more accurately, a gimmick. Over the following weeks, kissing became part of Hans's Kill Tony identity. At first it worked because the contrast was funny. The awkward, nerdy comic making out with women in front of an audience had a genuine comedic logic to it. But novelty has a short shelf life. Once the audience started cheering the kiss more than the joke, the gimmick had consumed the performer. Tony eventually had to manufacture the situations. T-shirts were printed to incentivize women to participate. When that stopped working reliably, women with professional arrangements were brought in and presented as audience members. Hans had stopped being the subject of comedy and started being the object of it. There's a meaningful difference. By the time Rick Diaz showed up, Hans's position as a regular was already under pressure. Tony had begun structuring challenges. If another comic outperformed Hans in a head-to-head, they would earn a shot at the regular role. Hans navigated the early challenges and kept his spot. But Rick Diaz was a different situation. Rick won a golden ticket on his first Kill Tony appearance. That alone was notable. But what he did with it was what nobody expected. Instead of simply enjoying the access the golden ticket provided, Rick publicly challenged Hans for the regular ship. He said it plainly on stage. He could kick Hans Kim's ass.
Regular on this show anyway.
I could take a leave of absence if I negotiated it. And I would kick Hans Kim's ass.
Whoa,
just for the sake of
Jesus
it.
Christ.
The room reacted. Tony pushed back, noting that Rick held a full-time position in Brussels and couldn't realistically commit to a regular role. Rick's response was that he could take a leave of absence. What complicated everything is that Hans and Rick had actually been getting along outside the show. They were doing sets together around Austin, playing board games. Hans had invited him into his social circle. The public challenge felt, to Hans, like a betrayal from someone he considered a friend. The issue wasn't just the competition. It was the way Rick went about it, without any warning, without a private conversation, on stage, in front of an audience. Hans spoke about it later in exactly those terms. This was his career, not a prop for someone else's moment. The eventual match was set for New Year's Eve, Hans versus Rick Diaz. The stakes were clear. Winner keeps the regular ship. Loser loses their position on the show. Shane Gillis and Matt McCusker were on the panel that night. When it ended, the mood in the room was uncertain. Both panelists seemed reluctant to give a direct verdict. The laughter metrics for the two sets were close enough that no clean winner emerged from the audience's reaction.
All right, commentary, Rick's got the longest forearms I've ever seen.
And the winner is Hans Kim! And still reigning, defending, regular of Kill Tony, Hans Kim.
Tony ultimately announced Hans as the winner, but the online response told a different story. A significant portion of viewers believed Rick had won, or at minimum deserved the nod. The comments section became a referendum on Hans, not just on that night, but on everything that had come before it. The petition to remove him from the show, which had been circulating for a while, picked up new momentum. Hans's reaction to winning didn't help him. He was visibly hostile toward Rick in the immediate aftermath.
Bye.
But I don't.
Bye. Boring. Go back to your fucking Instagram.
Bye!
It came across as insecure rather than competitive. For a performer whose likability had always been part of his appeal, it was a damaging moment. Tony arranged a break. Hans would take time off to prepare for a rematch on a larger stage. In his absence, a new regular was introduced to fill the weekly spot. What had been framed as a strategic pause was, functionally, a demotion. Hans was no longer the every-week presence he had been. When he came back, the terms had changed. In the 5 months following the New Year's Eve battle, Hans appeared on Kill Tony 5 more times. That's it, 5 appearances across 5 months. For a performer who had previously been on every single week, he had become a special appearance. In a conversation on the show, Hans admitted, what most people watching could already see. He said he knew that people were getting sick of him. He said he wanted to leave on a good note, not like this.
You know, I've been in that position for such a long time, and people, I think, are getting sick of me.
Why?
Just because I hear about it online.
Yeah. Don't read this.
But
don't read this.
He didn't get to choose how it ended. What killed Hans Kim's Kill Tony run wasn't one decision or one bad set. It was a combination of things that compounded over time. He stopped treating comedy as the priority in a period when it needed to be his only priority. He let a gimmick become his identity. He handled the Rick Diaz situation in a way that alienated people who were on the fence about him. And when the crowds turned, the ego that had developed alongside his success made it harder to respond with the kind of humility that might have bought him more time. His story at Kill Tony tracks a pattern that the show has produced more than once. The platform gives comics an opportunity that most people in stand-up never get, but it also concentrates everything: the attention, the pressure, the temptation, the scrutiny. Not everyone handles that well. Hans Kim handled parts of it extremely well for a while. His early sets as a regular were genuinely impressive. The audience wasn't wrong to respond to him the way they did. But the version of Hans, who had slept in a van for 3 years and done sets for 20 people in New York, because it was the only thing he wanted to do, that version had to share space with a newer version who had access to everything he'd been working toward. And the newer version won out when it mattered most. Whether he comes back from it is a separate question. He's still performing. He still has an audience outside of Kill Tony. But the platform that made him visible to millions is no longer his in the way it once was. And the guy who took his golden ticket and challenged him from across a board game table? Still a story that Hans returns to when asked. Some betrayals leave a mark.